welcome in, wherever you are listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of the Young Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Jay. Excited to be with you guys yet again for another awesome episode. Before we jump too far into it, I do just want to encourage everybody and everybody else to go down to the description of every episode, whether you're on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're podcasting. There's a lot of different places you can be doing it, but the descriptions are all the same. Go down, the very tippy top of the description is asking y'all to subscribe to the email list. Email list gives you access to our twice-a-week newsletter. Our twice-a-week newsletter contains new episodes that come out. You're the first one to know that they came out. You're the first to know about any collaborations we have coming up with other podcasts to cross-promote. You're the first to know of any new deals, new affiliations, new anything of the podcast. You're the first to know. So please go down and subscribe to the email newsletter. It's absolutely free, and it costs you nothing but a quick little email address, and that's it. So we'll leave that there. That's enough of the business, as they say in the industry. Let me introduce who's on the other side of the screen here from me. I have Jim. Jim, a little bit about you, a little bit about your show or program. It's the Christian Saints podcast, and as the Young Dad podcast listenership know, we are Christians. We're not afraid to talk about God and our religious views here on the show. Most other podcasts are, but it's something that we tend to not shy away from. We fully embrace it as a part of who we are, and we fully believe you should embrace who you are. So a little bit about your guys' show. It's a weekly program. It goes through I can't say this
liturgical
word. Liturgical, thank you, calendar of the Orthodox Church on a weekly basis, and remembers a saint or commemorates a feast from each week. You guys publish on Saturday mornings. The program begun with Jim. You were only doing music. Other people got involved in politics in Singapore, and they ran out of time, so you've taken over for about the last year now. Jim, you're not a dad, but that's okay. You're a husband. You're a man of God. Tell us about you. Tell us about the show, because I feel like I did not do it
Thank you
very
for having
good
us.
justice.
So
introducing it here.
The podcast has been around since early 2020. A good friend of mine, Dr. Darren Ong, who lives in Malaysia, who I met when he was getting his PhD in mathematics in Houston, because I lived in Houston at the time. He started the program, and he was utilizing music that I had already written originally, work that went back quite some time, and using that for the show. And then as he got further along with the show, he asked me to create some very specific pieces that were particular for the program. So I got a little bit more involved, and every once in a while, if he was traveling, I would do a guest episode or something like that. And then a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, he decided to start running for local offices there in Malaysia, which has occupied quite a lot of his time, and his teaching schedule has gotten busier. And so he didn't have the time to continue to do the program every week. So last year, between January and June, we kind of did a phased transition to make sure that I was going to have the time to pick it up before we sort of committed to it. And it became clear that it was something I was going to be able to do. So starting beginning of June last year, so coming up on a year now, I've been composing music every week and putting together the episodes myself. I have oversight from a priest. My priest has given me permission to do the show, but another priest that I knew in Houston, who now lives in Iowa City, which is not far from Chicago, which is where I live now, he reads all my scripts to make sure they're not full of heresy and error before they go out on the air, which is very helpful to have his help with his show, or with his oversight. And he also does a number of podcasts, and I do music and production for him as well. So when you hear me mention on my show Paradosis Pavilion, that is Father Simeon and his programs. So we sort of joint promote. My music is published under the name Generative Sounds, and so we say that our show is jointly produced by Generative Sounds and Paradosis Pavilion. So yeah, that is what we do. We go through the liturgical calendar, meaning every day there are, actually on any given day, there's easily 7 to a dozen saints that are remembered, plus We have the 12 major feasts plus Pascha, which is in the West we call Easter. And then there are a number of smaller feasts beyond that. So it's actually a very dense calendar. It'd be many years before we sort of run out of people to talk about. And I mean, we've done some duplicates anyway, but because some people, there's just so much to say, and we try not to make the program 4 hours long. Yeah, so it's a recurring calendar every year, and we've just been working our way through it and coming up with we read the life of the saints if we have a good hagiography of their life, which depending on how old some of the saints are, we don't know very much about them. But what we do know, we try to extract a lesson from and apply it to today, because from our perspective, the goal for any Christian is to become a saint. So our objective is to emulate these people and not be exactly like them. Every saint is different. It's one of the amazing things. They all take on the likeness of Christ, but they all are distinct. It's not like some other faith systems where your personality is sort of obliterated into the oneness of the universe or something. So we are all trying to become a saint in our own way, but we have these people as guides to help us get there. So that's what we're trying to do is help people see what they can learn each week from these saints.
I love that. So now, can you re-explain that to me like I'm 5? I'm just kidding. Because no, that's really cool. Because I mean, that definitely takes it deep. That takes it to a different level of Christianity. Something that I hadn't been super familiar with. Of course, I'm familiar with the Bible. I'm familiar with the Old and the New Testament. I'm familiar with some other religious texts as well, through just studying and through people and through family and whatnot. I'm familiar with some other religious books, different versions of the Bible, of course. So I find it fascinating talking about these different perspectives and then finding the applicable ways to it. Because that's what a lot of people say, I feel. They say, well, the Bible was written 2,000 plus years ago. It doesn't apply to today. Absolutely false. Absolutely false. The Bible is pretty much just, it's been lived out so many generations over and over and over again. It's hard to say that it's not being played out again today. It's too early in my mind, can't think. But let me ask you this. For the studies that you've done, the different saints that you've covered, what are some saints that relate very closely to fatherhood and that set a pretty good example of what fatherhood is or was?
The one that would leap immediately to mind,
time.
because we did it relatively recently, back at the end of December, obviously we have Christmas, and then immediately between, so people have heard of the 12 days of Christmas, and a lot of people don't necessarily know what they are. They actually are all feasts of the church. The Christmas season is 12 days long. At the end of that season, then on the next day after those 12 days is, in the West, the feast they call Epiphany, which is when they remember the arrival of the wise men. In the Eastern Church, which is what I'm a member of, we call it Theophany, and it's when we remember John the Baptist baptizing Jesus in the Jordan River. And so between those 2 days, there's a number of remembrances, all of which are related to members of Jesus' family or him fulfilling the Torah. So immediately after his birth, we have the remembrance of Saint Joseph the Betrothed and Jesus' brother in the flesh, who was Joseph's son, James, who became the first bishop of Jerusalem. But also on the 8th day, we have the feast of the circumcision, which people don't talk about very much with relation to Jesus, but it is mentioned there in the Gospels that it was done, that he fulfilled the law. We also know that then at other times in his life, he was taken and presented in the temple, which was also a way of fulfilling the law. So during that time, we did an entire episode on Joseph the Betrothed, and it's interesting. There's very little in the Bible about Joseph. We get the account at the beginning of how Mary came into his life and why, and we get some of his concerns when he found out that she was pregnant. And then there's the little bit of the story of when Jesus is around 12 years old, they go to the temple and they lose him for a couple of days. And then he's never mentioned again, other than in saying Jesus is Joseph's son. he never actually shows up in the story anymore. And so, in spite of how little material there actually is, there's quite a lot we can dig into there about fatherhood. And so we really enjoyed putting that episode together. It was interesting to see what we could glean, given that at the surface there doesn't seem to be a lot there. For us, we're always wanting to say that fatherhood, people tend to look at religion now and they say, oh, you have this God, and like you take all these human characteristics and you put them on God. So you make him male and you make him a father. And it's like, no, for us, it's completely the other way around. We understand masculinity and fatherhood because God the Father and God the Son demonstrate them for us. And so they are what it means to be perfectly masculine and to be father, and we do our best to emulate them, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And I think you're 100%
Joseph
right
the
there.
Betrothed is a great example of both of those things for us, and so that was a powerful episode.
No, that's 100% true. And I think it's interesting you brought up circumcision, because I was literally teaching a few weeks ago, and we teach from the Gospels. I can't remember. We're talking about Paul, I want to say. And we're talking about the epistles and how he took the letters around, and it was the Galatians, I want to say. I could be not remembering that right, but it was one of the epistles, one of the letters of Paul that he took to one of the other countries, saying like, hey, what you're teaching is false, basically. This isn't what you need to be saved. And it mentioned circumcision, and my fifth graders were so confused. My fifth graders were like, what's circumcision? I'm like, ask your parents, please. Say that was a big word brought up today in class, and Mr. J wanted to have you guys talk to your parents about that.
Yeah, that's awkward.
I avoided that one.
I guess younger kids in this country would not be as
familiar. Yeah,
I'm old enough that most young men who were born in hospitals when I was a child it's not the religious ceremony, it's a medical circumcision. And so that was much more normal when I was a kid, but that is much less of a thing now. So I'm not surprised that kids weren't necessarily up to date on what that is.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, and I'm not the one to explain that to them. That's their parent. I'm gonna let their parents have all that fun with them. I just teach a lesson from the.
That's a bold choice to put that in a book for kids.
Do I always? Sometimes I get too far ahead of myself. I know it was in the lesson plan. I probably should have done my due diligence a little bit better and read over it a couple more times. Usually I like skim it. I'm like, okay, I know what we're talking about. Like, I know where my lesson's at, basically. I know how I'm going to teach this. And then, like, I probably should spend a little bit more time going over the talking points than I do. I spend maybe about an hour preparing the whole lesson, and I'm just like, okay, this makes sense. I'm reading the scriptures. I know what the context is, and I know what's going on, so I can teach it. I already read it time over and time over again, kind of thing. So I don't spend a lot of time preparing, but that definitely made me think about it. But it was all context, because that's what they said. They were saying that people had to do to be clean. They had to do that to be worthy of heaven and worthy of the gospel, essentially worthy of God. At that time, it was a religious ceremony. I can't remember the book. I can't remember the people. But it's from one of the epistles. And if you guys are unfamiliar with what epistles were basically letters that Paul.
Most of them are Paul.
Right?
There are a few. John wrote 3. James wrote 1. There's the 2 epistles of Peter. But I think all the rest are Paul. Of course, these days academics like to say that nobody whose name's on them actually wrote them, which is all nonsense. But that's another story. Actually, the issue, the push-pull, the push-pull with Paul and the Torah and Christianity comes up in several of It came up with the Romans. He wrote, I mean, he didn't establish the church in Rome, so it's interesting that he was writing to them, because almost all of his other epistles, he's writing to churches he established. Rome, he had never visited yet. He knew he was on his way there because he had been arrested and he was going to be tried by Caesar. But so he wrote to them. There was a period where all the Jews had been expelled from the city of Rome for revolting. So they were away from the city for a couple of years, which meant the Christian community became entirely Gentile for a short time there, which at that point in history was very unusual. Christianity really wasn't a distinct thing yet. It was kind of more a sect of Judaism, really, in the same way that the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Essenes and the Nazarites were all, these distinct groups. And so he wrote to them when the Jews were allowed back into the city and were then reincorporating into these communities. He was afraid they were going to end up establishing separate churches, that there were going to be sort of Gentile churches and Jewish churches. And so he wrote to them to say, like, you can't do that. You have to be one church. So it comes up quite a bit in Romans, which is where you get into all the stuff that people these days love to latch onto, of not being saved by the law, which people think means not being saved by good behavior, which is not the same thing, really. But we don't have to get into all that. But so it comes up in quite a few of the letters for different reasons. There were groups going around insisting that to be a Christian, you had to convert to Judaism first, which is what eventually gets resolved in the 15th chapter of Acts at the Council of Jerusalem, where they say, no, you don't have to do that, which is why all of us today are not Jews. We're Christians, and and that's what led to it becoming more and more distinct over time, was that decision. In theory, not that there are very many people, but in theory, if somebody who was Jewish wanted to become a Christian, strictly speaking, according to what the Bible says, they would continue to keep Torah even though they were a Christian, because for them, that is their tradition. It's the Gentiles that are not held to it. So, which, I don't know if people would actually do that these days or not, but I am not called to evangelize to the Jews, so I don't know. But
yeah, same. But no, that's exactly where we were. We were talking about the behaviors. We were talking about how people were being taught, like, you have to follow the law of the land to get saved. Like, that was what precedented it. We were talking about works and faith, and how we were just talking about all that and the context behind it. So that was the point of the lesson. That was just in there. So that just what you mentioned brought up. But I think the other thing you mentioned there a little bit ago was about masculinity, and how current society says that the Bible is just labeled, that we've just assumed that God is the Father, when it literally says in the Bible, God the Father, the Son of Man. It says these key phrases in the Bible. It's hard to deny when throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, God the Father.
And he's Father because he begets the Son. He doesn't birth the Son. In a lot of other ancient religions, their God Most High was female because she would birth creation. And one of the things that made the worship of Yahweh completely distinct was that it wasn't that way. That their God created the world externally and then begets the Son. That's why we have Mary the Theotokos, and she births God into the incarnate world. But God the Father begets, and that's what makes him Father, is the begetting, rather than he fills this patriarchal role, therefore he's Father. It's like, well, no, patriarchy comes from the fact that God Most High is Father. It goes the other direction.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, and the Bible's a great resource for men, for everybody, but especially men, to understand their roles as dads, to understand their roles as fathers, because the example is set clean and clear for you. Exactly what you're supposed to do. One of my favorite sermons my pastor ever did was a couple years ago at this point? It might have been, but it's probably one of the most, like, it was one of those sermons to where it's like everything is like talking to you. And I'm trying to find it here. It was really good. It was so good. I wish I had it like labeled for what it was. Okay. We were talking about, one of the verses he said was in Galatians 3:28. But it was just talking, this was back in June of 2022. So context for like June of 2022 for me, I was a year-ish removed from my divorce happening. I was very lonely. I wasn't in a great place. I think I had only started going back to church for 2-3 months at this point. And life was starting to kind of get better. It wasn't great. In this context, I was very lonely. I was going in and out of relationships. Nothing was really clicking. Maybe not relationships. That makes me sound like a hoe, but I wasn't with anyone. I guess you could say that. It wasn't like a blissful time. And so this sermon is something that I took with me for a really long time, and something I clung to, and just some of the notes, it was just all about like wives and stuff. And we were talking about how Jesus is the what was this parable? The bride. My mind is not working today.
Is it the parable of the bridegroom and the
But
10 virgins?
how we should know our
Yeah, so he's the bridegroom. Yeah.
yes, yes, and how we should know our partner better than anyone, because Jesus knows us better than anyone, and he wants to protect us, and then in turn we want to protect our partner. And just gave us like a bunch of like priorities and related it back to this lesson. Talked about how Jesus took the heat for us. So then we take the heat for her. How Jesus has our back, we have her back. We're on the same side. And then he read Galatians about how how we're one with God, but our wives are the weaker vessel, which in turn doesn't mean that she's weaker. It just means she's a more fragile, beautiful, and at least his interpretation, what he taught, was that she's a more fragile piece of a vessel. You could think of it as like an oil vessel, like they had in Bible times, to where they would transport oil in these like jars, essentially. But our wives, are vessels that are like made of the most fine crystal. Like they are expensive. They are so fragile. Like if you even clean that against the wall, it's gonna break into a million pieces, kind of thing. Where it's just where they're so fragile, but they're so precious at the same time. And that's how our partnerships with our spouses are equal partnership in all things. And then he went on to talk about how it's a 100-100 partnership, not a 50-50. How Jesus wouldn't take us where we don't want to go. We don't take our wives where they don't want to go. Until God talks to her and she talks to God, and they agree, and then so on and so forth. But that's just one example that I was able to think of off the top of my head that I had a note for. But the Bible sets such a good example. God sets and Jesus set just this ever forward message of love, to love our children. The Bible literally tells us how to love our spouse, how to love our children, how to raise them, how to be an example for them. Like it tells us all these amazing things. And if you don't have that as a piece of your fatherhood journey, you need it, because it's something that can be highly impactful to you, if you let it be. It's all about your belief. It's all about where you fall on that. If you let it be impactful, it can be impactful. If it's not, then you may be missing a piece of, just your overall potential.
Yeah, for sure. we also get a lot of excellent examples of what not to do, especially in the Old Testament. It's interesting these days, depending on which corners of social media you pay attention to, there's all these people talking about, oh, the Bible advocates polygamy. It's like, well, no, it acknowledges that polygamy exists. And if you read the stories where it comes up, every last one of them is terrible. Horrible things happen. Children are abandoned. Women are let loose into the desert with no protection. It's never a good thing. It's always, by the way, if you do this, your life is going to be not great. Don't do it. Just because there isn't a verse that says thou shalt not have two wives. And so there's all sorts of wonderful examples. I mean, Abraham's life in particular. His relationship with Sarah is not good. I mean, twice he pretends that she's his sister so people won't kill him. He's sleeping with her servants, and then as soon as she's dead, he marries somebody. I mean, he's 101 or 110, and he marries somebody else and has more kids, which is totally baffling. And so you read his whole story, and it's like, yeah, this is exactly how not to be a husband, because this is not going well for him. And it creates complications in his life. I mean, in spite of the promises of God around Isaac, there are all these other complications in his life around his other children because he's not being faithful to his wife. So we get both sort of, we have that on the one hand, and then we have, as I said, Joseph the Betrothed on the other, who very much, when the threat from Herod comes, he takes up his whole family, his whole livelihood, everything in his life, and they move to Egypt to make sure that everything, and they were going to, it's clear in the text, they were going to stay there. There's a point where God has to basically tell him to go back. That like, no, it's fine. Yes, I know his kids are on the throne, but it's going to be fine. You can go back. They were going to just stay. Obviously, it would be difficult for Jesus to be the Messiah from Egypt, so they have to go back. And Joseph doesn't necessarily know that.
True.
But he has uprooted his entire way of life to protect his family at a moment's notice. That's a strong example for us. And of course, there's the passage in Ephesians that gets read at a lot of weddings that makes people cringe because it says, wives, submit to your husbands. And then nobody pays attention to the next bit, which is, husbands, love your wives, which at the time that it was written, people were married in arranged marriages. You may be getting married to a woman you've never met, and you may not like her, and you're being told to love her anyway. And the next bit basically says, oh yeah, and love her the way Christ loved the church, which means you take a bullet for her. Whether you like her or not, you need to be willing to die for this person. Yeah. And we don't have the context to hear. Now we hear it controversially the other way around, but at the time that it was written, the part to the men was the controversial bit. It was very easy in a Jewish context for men to dismiss their wives. It's why Jesus is so harsh on divorce in the couple places where it comes up in the gospel, is that men were doing it as a convenience. Once they were a successful, established person, they wanted a better wife, and it was commonplace. And he was like, yeah, you can't do that. That's not how that works.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the thing, is everything's taken out of context now, where people will find the one verse, but did you read the verses before it? Did you read the verses after it? Or did you just read that one verse that's saying, wives, submit to your husbands, kind of thing? And I don't feel like enough people spend the time to read, or even those who are making videos about it, that are influencers, or that are whatever they say they are about this and talking about it. I feel like they just jump on and they take something and they run with it, because it's all about the context. It's all about saying something controversial enough to get the attention, to get the engagement, to get the comment, to get people who do believe it, that do know the context, to comment and engage and to be mad. It's all about creating, and it's not, I don't think it's these people necessarily. It's the adversary, for how he comes in and wants to create contention between believers and non-believers, because he wants to create a space and use these Bible verses out of context with the right people saying them, so then more people believe, oh my gosh, I'm not submitting to you. Boom, divorce. Here in America, we have nearly a 50% divorce
For a time,
rate.
I think it was more than 50, yeah.
That's not biblical. Yeah, I think 50 is kind of where we're at right now. It's definitely grown. It's definitely on the upward trajectory still. It's not slowing down. unfortunately. I think during COVID, like during lockdown, it actually went up to around the 60s. I think we've settled back down around the 50s. Which, I mean, a regression in that area, great. Make sure your household stays
Yeah,
intact.
lockdown was an interesting time for
But
Americans. There were a lot of
it's
aspects of our
unfortunate.
way of life that were taken away from us. And it made people realize how unhappy they actually were, but that they were too distracted to realize how unhappy they were. People with long commutes suddenly spending long amounts of time at home, which they were not accustomed to doing, around their spouse, around their children, around their own home, around their neighbors. People having outdoor parties and things with their neighbors because people weren't. And suddenly we all realized, wow, like this American dream thing is not what I thought it was. And we see now, like in the
Mhm.
years since, more and more people are not picking that old way. I mean, too many people have just gone right back to what it was before, and they want to, but a lot of people, refuse to pick that long commute back up. They're like, no, I'll just keep working from home. Thanks. That's fine. I don't need to live in my car. Um, we have
Yeah.
seen some changes come out of it, and it's unfortunate that one of the things that was exposed at that time was that a lot of people enter into marriage without really understanding what marriage is and what it's for. And in the church, we understand marriage as sort of the front lines of our own spiritual growth, which means it's hard, it's a challenge. My capacity to do right by my wife is a direct result of, is my prayer life correct? Am I getting to church every week? Am I participating in the sacraments? Am I confessing my sins? If I'm not doing those things, I'm not going to treat her well. And that's what marriage is for, is if I can't treat her well, how on earth am I going to treat strangers well? How on earth am I going to treat people I perceive? I mean, as you said, people we think of as enemies, and then you corrected yourself. No, it's the adversary. Paul said, our enemies are not flesh and blood. The parable of the Good Samaritan, the whole point Jesus is making is everyone is your neighbor. Even the people you don't like are your neighbor. The enemies are the demons
Mm-hmm.
who are trying to delude us into sin
100%.
and death. And if I can't remember that with my wife, there's no way I'm going to remember that with anybody else. And if I can't remember that with anybody else, there's no hope for me.
100%. And I think that's such an important message here. Like, the people that you're enemies with, they're not your enemy. They're not the person you shouldn't have. And I feel like this is one of the most detrimental things to our society, is just how okay it is to hate. Like, it's okay to throw around the word, I hate that. Oh, I hate that. Oh, I hate that. Oh, I hate that. Oh, that sounds like it sucks. Like, I would hate that. Like, there's so much hate, and it drives me crazy. Like, my daughters, whenever they say hate, I'm like, oh, whoa, 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 we're not saying that word. Because that hate is rooted in a place that I understand as a biracial male, mixed male, that, that hate, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. That hate can easily come out, toward gender, toward race, toward religion, toward political views. It's so easy for everyone, in some way, shape, or form, to say, oh, well, I hate you because of this one thing. I hate you, instead of asking them, hey, tell me more about why you believe that. Help me understand that. Because I think that's interesting. We don't have these conversations like you and I are having. Like a lot of podcasts I record, we have, where it's like, no, I'm just going to not affiliate, not associate with you. I just instantly hate you because of the way you look, the way you act, the way you smell, the way one belief that you have, the way you vote, the color of your skin, the religion that you subscribe to, the religious texts that you read. I instantly hate you. That was never the message of the Bible. That was never the point of it. If Jesus would hated anyone, would he have stood in front of a woman getting stoned for adultery, one of the highest sins in Bible context? Probably not. If he would have hated Peter specifically, would he have told Peter 3 times, you're going to betray me? Tried to warn him, and then came and reconciled. He went to Peter and reconciled and forgave him. He went out of his way to do that. If Jesus would have hated anyone for any reason, all he needed was one reason: to not die on that cross for every single person listening to this, for every single person in the world not listening to this. He had every reason to not. He had every reason to hate people, to hate the people killing him, persecuting him, spitting at him, throwing stones at him, throwing rocks at him. But he didn't. He loved them. He loved every single person. And I feel that we do not have enough just basic love for each other. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, well, how much do you love yourself? Myself quite a bit. Okay, so now however much you love yourself, that's how much you love everyone around you. Everyone you interact with. That's how you treat everybody. I actually just taught about this at Awana this last week with my tea and tears, about how love is so important. Love opens doors to our neighbors. I truly believe, this is one of my biggest things I like to talk about, but love opens doors to ministry. Love opens doors to talking to people about God and about faith and about the Bible and whatnot. Because I always feel like if I'm going to go and talk to someone about my faith, I cannot just hit them with a Bible verse right off the bat. That's going to make them flee for the mountain. That's going to make them stay far away from me. They're not going to want to interact with me. But if I can show them that I love them, that I treat them kindly, that I treat them differently, when they're around me, they feel a little bit different. The more that they're around it, the more that they feel that, they're going to be like, what the heck is up with this guy? Why is he so happy? Why is he so caring? Why does it feel like he actually genuinely like loves me and cares about me? And then you know what? The seed's already planted. Then they're going to come up and they're going to start asking me like, what is it about you? Oh, well, I have a lot of faith in God. I really believe in the Bible. Jesus is my main guy. I pray every day. I read the Bible every day. And they're like, so that's it? Like, that's a big part of it. Here, let me read a verse to you. Let me read a passage with you. Let me recommend a passage to you. If you're ever more curious, come to church with me. Sometimes it opens that door. They're more willing to listen because they see like, oh, this person who I interact with on a consistent basis goes to that place. How many other cool people are there too that are also like this? Like, have I been missing out on this the whole time? And it just naturally progresses to that. At least I feel my experience is it naturally progresses to that versus when you're trying to just push your agenda on someone. Because people are smart, people can pick up on it. It's about love. Really is what I'm trying to say here is love. Stop hating. You have no reason to hate. Hate just hurts you as well as an individual. Hate, anger, holding on to those things. What's the purpose? Does it help you? Does it make you feel better? Probably a little bit, but not a lot. Makes you feel bad again. And so we need more love in the world. We need more Jesus, basically. Because it's so important to love people. Because we need more love, especially in our country. We need a lot more love. Because there's no way, shape, or form that we should have so many issues around families, around gender, around race, racism. It's all founded in hate. It's all just hate. Someone hated someone enough to make it into a big thing. And now it's even bigger, and the hate has tenfolded upon itself. The devil's gotten in there, and he's made it bigger and bigger and bigger. Slowly and slowly, one influencer, one message, one out of context Bible verse at a time, to ruin families, to ruin religion for a lot of people, to make masculinity seem terrible, to make being a man seem terrible, to create all these additional issues, to make racism seem okay, kind of thing. Like, he's gotten in there at the ground floor. He's there from day one. He's there from moment zero of all these things. And he got a little bit, he took a little bit more, pushed a little bit, got a little bit. Because that's how it works. So I
There you go.
only preach the third through
No,
sixth graders.
I resonate with everything. I resonate with everything you said, and I
That's my
think the two
niche.
halves of what you were saying are deeply related. We've become too comfortable with the word hate because we've watered it down, and we've watered down that word because we've watered down the word love. You know, we in English we say we love pizza, which, I mean, I'm a good East Coast boy. If anybody loves pizza, I love pizza. But it, in a certain sense,
For
when
sure.
you understand what love, when you understand what love is in the Bible, the idea that you can love pizza doesn't make any sense because you can't engage in like self-sacrificial, self-emptying to pizza, right? So the word doesn't apply. But we talk this way. We've turned it in. We've psychologized it. We've turned it into a system of emotions and feelings. We mean I'm well disposed to something, and so then the flip side of hate, instead of understanding hate as actively mistreating and dehumanizing people, which is what hate really is, we think of it as things we're not well disposed to. And so like,
Yeah.
well, people who are different than me, I'm not well disposed to. And that's okay because, we're different. And so they probably don't like me either, and so we make that kind of hate because that genuinely is hate. We make that sort of okay. Um, it's an unfortunate thing for sure. And I think social media has abstracted it in a way where we don't realize the day-to-day practical side of normalizing these kinds of conversations, that when people in a sense get away with saying things that I think face to face they probably wouldn't have the stones to say, it emboldens things in other contexts. Again, I think during lockdown, I don't think it was at all a coincidence that during a time when people were less face to face, we had this sudden explosion of racial tension in the country because it emboldened one side to say a whole lot of things that I think they otherwise would not have said. And it created circumstances where people thought they were getting away with things that I think ordinarily they wouldn't have thought they were getting away with. And eventually, the inevitable happens in that context. We have a real misunderstanding in our current culture of what the wrath of God is and what the judgment of God is. We have a tendency to think more like Zeus with lightning bolts and the end of the world. Judgment is God trying to put things back where they belong. And 2020 and 2021 were to some extent a judgment on this country because things are really out of whack. Things are really not the way they should be. And it was an opportunity for us to look at ourselves and say, am I being like Christ or am I not being like Christ? And instead, most of us hoarded toilet paper and complained. We didn't really learn a lot of what we were supposed to learn.
Yeah.
But if you really paid attention, it
No, we didn't.
exposed a lot of the ways in which, especially American Christians, and I include myself because I learned a lot about myself during that time, it exposed a lot of the ways that we are not walking the walk. And people use that a lot nowadays in a very specific, narrow left of center way. And I mean it in the much more broad sense of, on a daily basis, am I taking the Lord's name in vain? Am I claiming to be a Christian even though nothing about me is Christ-like? To me, that's what taking the Lord's name in vain is I'm doing a scandal to the gospel by claiming to be a Christian and then acting like a jerk.
I hear that. And I like what you said. I really like what you said. How we diluted these two words. We've diluted these two phrases to the point to where it's like, I love The Office. The Office is my favorite show. Well, no, The Office is just my favorite show. The Seahawks are just my favorite football team. The Mariners are just my favorite baseball team. The Golden State Warriors are just my favorite basketball team. Steph Curry is by far my favorite player in the NBA right now, next to other great players and other young players I'm big fans of. I love these people as human beings, but I'm not going to idolize and worship them. I'm not going to live or die by the Eagles losing their playoff game and break a TV, because that shows that you're invested in the wrong things. If you're to the point where it's like, I'm going to break my whole TV because I'm so mad because my favorite football team lost a game, I think it's time for you to reprioritize some things. We get too caught up, and now it feels like in our country, we're told to love and focus our energy
for
into the
sure.
wrong
And
thing.
and I think going back to your conversation about masculinity,
And
whatever happened to the idea that like self-control was really manly? Like not in the like you swallow all of
right,
your emotions until you have a heart attack, but in the you calm yourself and you control yourself and you don't break your television.
you
That
regulate.
that's not being Hank Hill and eventually
Exactly.
having an
Or you,
infarction. That's being a grown up. And it amazes me that we see these
yeah,
violent outbursts as being masculine rather than entirely the opposite. I mean, it's one of the things that I love about the podcast that I do.
yeah,
The overwhelming majority of the saints that are on the calendar are male, mostly because the books are written by monastics, and the bulk of the monastics are male. I mean, we do have nuns in our tradition, but there just aren't as many of them.
mm-hmm.
Um, and so most of the saints that I'm covering are men, and the version of masculinity that saints paint is really different than the image of masculinity that they're not they're not in the book because they have a great bench. They're not in the book because they made billions of dollars. They're
right,
not in the book because their wife was smoking hot, or that they didn't have a wife, they had 20 different smoking hot girls. That's not why they're in the book. That's not what made them an amazing man. We have many saints that they are so and so the great, and they're great because of the amazing godly things they did. Their demonstrations of discipline, their demonstrations of
mm-hmm.
self-control, their demonstrations of gentleness, their demonstration of protecting others. That's what made them great men, and that is so different from what we're being taught. And it's interesting right now in our culture, we're being taught two really incompatible things. There's this kind of reactionary pro-male thing going on that people call toxic masculinity, which I don't like that phrase, mostly because there's nothing masculine about it. It's animalistic is what it is. And then there's the other version, which is in order to avoid that, we feminize people, and there's nothing particularly biblical about that. There's a way to be a man that isn't animalistic and isn't feminine. There is a third path, and that's the saints help us see that. And it's one of the things I
Yeah,
like about doing this. It's good for me as a man to read this every week and to read through these lives and see a different way.
100%. And I think it's just good. Like, what equates today? Like, I'm trying to think even right now in this moment, like, what makes someone great today? It's definitely up to the person's interpretation, honestly. Like, there should be a standard of greatness. Like, some people will say, oh, well, Joe Rogan's the greatest podcaster. Okay, why? Don't get me wrong, I'm a Joe Rogan fan. But it's like, what makes him the greatest? Because he gets paid millions upon millions of dollars by Spotify and YouTube? So the monetary part of it? Or is it the conversations and the awareness he brings to so many different issues? And he's a voice of reason for so many things, and he educates so many people. Not with his voice, he gets experts on to use their voice and to promote their work. And it's based in fact, it's based in science, it's based in the appropriate context, you know? And when he doesn't know something, he doesn't know something. To me, that's what makes him great. He talks about his kids so lovingly. He talks about his wife so lovingly. He talks about his dogs so lovingly. Is he a bit rough? Yeah, it's Joe Rogan. He's been punched in the head 100,000 times. But that doesn't make him any less to me. But it also doesn't make him more. Like, I respect the man because he's done great in his career. I respect him because he talks highly of his wife. He talks highly of his children. You never really see anything negative about the dude. He's just a good dude. He's just a really good dude. Like, I would like to meet him, just have a conversation. Because I'm not afraid to have that conversation. I'm not afraid to have conversations with people who I may not align with. I'm not afraid to have conversations with new people. Because why would I go take the route instead that says, oh, well, I don't like them, so they probably don't like me? You guys could end up being best friends. You guys could have so much more in common. Like, you guys could have such a cool story to tell later about, man, we looked at each other, we thought we wouldn't like each other, We sat down, we had a conversation, and we found out we're a lot more similar than we think. We found out we're a lot more similar than we thought we were going to be initially. That's what happens when you give each other the chance, when you give other people the chance to just be them, to conversate with them, to get to know them, to give them the opportunity. Jesus, he got to know people. He didn't judge them on first sight. Again, the woman at the well, the adulterous woman, Peter, all the apostles, really. He didn't judge them at first sight. Were they the perfect men for the job? Absolutely not. I'm pretty sure in the Bible it says they were all way just wonky jobs, tradesmen. They all had their own limitations as men, as people. So do we. The pastors in my church, they're definitely not the most, and this is not in any bad way or anything, but I'm not the most qualified person to be teaching Sunday school. I'm not. I'm for sure not. You know, lived a lot of life, made a lot of dumb choices. Everyone around me at church, same boat. Same boat. We're not that different. We've all made mistakes. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short. We've all messed up. We've all been however, at the same time, we all got to a point in our life where we realized, I don't want to do that anymore. It's not the life I want to live. I want to live for Jesus. I want to live a life of love. I want to live a life that glorifies my Creator, that glorifies the man who died on the cross for me. I want to live a life that glorifies that. And the way I found to do that was by giving back to the kids. It was by volunteering. That I was placed. It was weeks after weeks after weeks that I was hearing it in church. We need subs. We need teachers. That message was coming in loud.
And then finally it resonates. Oh, wait, that means me.
And it got to the point. Yeah, exactly. And then it was like, oh, I'll just sign up to sub here and there. No, subbing turned into, now this is my second full school year teaching the same class. You know, subbing, it was supposed to just be subbing. I didn't want it to be more. I didn't want my own class. I just wanted to sub and help out occasionally. No, it turned into a whole class. 2 years now. When I started volunteering and helping with Awana, it was only supposed to be just volunteering, helping out. Now it's teaching council time and leading council time. Plans change. Plans change. God has different plans for us. As long as we put ourselves in the door, He's going to do the rest. You know, when I was dating and getting to know my now wife and my second wife now, you know, at first it was, you know, God, just give me someone good. Give me someone that, you know, that I could work with. If it works here, cool. God was like, haha, gotcha. You're going to get married again, sucker. And he got me good. Darn it. Kind of thing. But honestly, when I look back personally, and I look back, even when this podcast started, I never thought I would get into so many top conversations about religion, so many conversations about politics, so many conversations about fatherhood in so many different ways, shapes, and forms, from talking to people from all over the world. And all I prayed for when I kept doing this podcast and kept doing it and doing it and doing it was just connect me with the right people. Connect me with the people and let those who are supposed to hear it. And kind of just make it what you need to make it. You know, make every episode what you need to make it into. And I look back at all these things now, and I'm like, man, God, you got me good. You got me real good. I see what you did there. I see what you did. I didn't see it at the time. I didn't see what you were working. But now I see it. Now I see the picture. Now I'm starting to zoom out a little bit. I'm starting to see this big, beautiful painting of my life that you have for me. I'm starting to see a little bit more. Starting to get a little bit more clear. I'm understanding it. And that's one of the coolest things about, you know, having such a strong connection to God and to faith in general, is that you get to see this picture that He's painted for each of us. so much more clear. The deeper we dive into it, we see the picture unfold before our eyes, and it makes sense. And in everything, when we go out through our lives with more faith and with more love, we appreciate everything on the outside of our four walls inside. We appreciate the colors, we appreciate the smells, we appreciate having a car. We just have more gratitude. We're just more grateful people. Uh, and yeah, it's so important. You know, sit down, have that conversation with yourself, have that conversation with others. You never know. You never know
Gratitude is an
until you do it.
underappreciated virtue, especially in this country. But yeah, it's
It is.
being in a sacramental tradition, we receive the Eucharist every Sunday, and actually in our particular parish we have services on Thursday mornings most weeks, so it's usually more than once a week that we're there receiving communion. And Eucharist is the Greek word for Thanksgiving. It's like the holiday that we have in this country every year, and it brings home when we remember that. That gratitude really is, it's supposed to be a huge part of who we're becoming. We in the tradition I'm in, there's certain things that people say a lot, and they can become those things that you say them so often you forget that they mean something. And when someone asks you like, "Oh, how's it going?" We don't say, "Oh, I'm fine." We have a tendency to say, "Oh, thank God," which is short for like, "Thank God for all things." And we can forget that part of, it doesn't matter how I'm doing. That God is giving me what I need for my salvation. And if today I have a head cold and my schedule's too busy, that's because today I need that to remind me to rely on Him, not on my own strength, right? That's what I need today, is to be reminded that I'm fragile, that I'm limited. And there are other days where, lest I fall into despair, I'm having a really nice, happy, good day because I need to remember that God is good, and so that day, that's what I'm getting. So yeah, gratitude is no matter what is coming our way, there's a reason. I mean, one of the beautiful things about being a person of faith is we live in a universe that has a reason. The materialist universe doesn't have a reason. Lots of people are trying to give it one, and lots of people still want to insist, oh, we can tell everybody how to behave, even though it's all just atoms flying around, which, if you study enough philosophy, doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. But we have meaning behind everything that happens in our lives. And so there's that passage that people deeply misunderstand that says that, God works all things for the good of those who love Him. And we have a tendency to hear that, to think, oh, you're going to have a nice, comfortable, easy life. And again, when I read the saints every week, the vast majority of them were martyred, usually in horrible ways. The ones who weren't lived in the desert as a monastic, eating beans for 40 years, and staying up all night praying. And there are guys that lived for 30 years on the top of a column for some reason that I don't entirely understand. But it meant they prayed a lot because there wasn't nothing else to do up there. And, it's not prosperity gospel by any stretch of the imagination. It is, if you want to become like Christ, and that is if you wake up every day with that intention and you pray that intention, what happens to you that day will be for the good, because you're trying to love God. And you've shared some of your struggles. My adult life, I made a lot of big mistakes, and with God's help, I've gotten through them, and I'm to a place now where my life is relatively stable. I can look back on some of those things and see, even though I made a mistake, and it's not that, oh, because something good came out of it, it's not a mistake. It is a mistake. It was something I shouldn't have done. But God has redeemed it. God has fixed it. God has turned it into something that, if I hadn't done it, my life wouldn't be where it is now. And if my life isn't where it is now, then I don't know who I would be. And maybe that would be better, and maybe it would be worse. But God has redeemed it. And that's in spite of my mistakes, not obliterating my mistakes, not meaning I'll never make mistakes, not meaning I won't have challenges. But if I can wake up every day wanting to be like Christ, and saying, God, help me to be like Christ, He can fix anything that happens in that cause, not to make it easy, not to make it comfortable. But I mean, as you said, we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, I like being comfortable and well fed and warm. I put a lot of my day into making sure that I'm comfortable,
Right.
well fed, and warm.
True.
How much time am I spending each day making sure the people around me are comfortable, well fed, and warm? I live in a city that received an awful lot of the refugees that came up from the border from other states. And it was a real wake up call to people here to drive down the street and drive past a police station and see 500 people in tents in front of a police station. That shocked a lot of people. And again, to me, it's a little bit like lockdown. Okay, it's a shock. That's God telling you something. Are you just now being upset and offended? Do you hide from it? Do you get angry about it? Or do you do something about it? Do you make some phone calls and find out, how are we taking care of these people? Who's feeding these people? Who's making sure they don't get mugged? That's why they're camping outside the police station, right? But the police have other things to do. They can't be babysitting 500 people all day. So what do we,
True.
regardless of what I think about that whole situation politically, the part that matters for me on a day-to-day basis, if I'm going to claim the name of Christ, is what did I do about it? Did I try to love those people? Because the end of Matthew 25,
True.
the separation of the sheep and the goats, it says the judgment is, did you visit the widow and the orphan? Did you feed the hungry? Did you clothe the naked? Did you visit the imprisoned? It doesn't say, can you pass this theological quiz? Which is tough. It's tough because we look at our lives and we say,
yeah,
I don't do a lot with widows and orphans, really. I like to write checks to people who do things with widows and orphans. That's easier.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier that way. Well, Jim, this has been a lot of fun. I think these are some great messages for everyone, whether they're a person of faith or not, to really take in and consider, and to think about and to ponder, if you will, if I could use a big word there, an inquisitive word. Look at me, 2 for 2. So yeah, I love this. Before we wrap up here, I just want to give a shout out to this episode's sponsor, the June app. Drive positive behavior change with June. Is your child struggling with behavior, habits, or routines while at school or at home? Well, me too. Honestly, we struggle with that too. Well, June might be worth a look. This new revolutionary app combines a video game that kids love, my kids adore it, with important tasks and habits that you want them to practice daily. And trust me, they get motivated. Give the app a try for free and use my code YNGDAD to earn 25% off your subscription. See why almost 1 million families and over 1,000 therapists are recommending June. And visit juneapp.io. That's JOONAPP.io/YoungDad. That's /YOUNGDAD to learn more. And of course, that link and that code are in the bio on all social medias, and of course, in the description of this episode. Jim, please tell us where we can find more of you, more of your podcast.
Yeah, so we are at this point. We distribute the podcast through Buzzsprout, which sends it to sort of all the major platforms. I think there's 14 of them or something, so I'm not going to sit here and enumerate all of them. But the obvious ones: Spotify, Apple, Google. If you use something more obscure, you can write to me and I can confirm for you that it's available there. We are definitely on all the major social media. We do Facebook and Instagram, Threads, Twitter. I guess it's X now. We did just recently start up a YouTube channel. I do a short midweek video to announce what this weekend's episode will be. And I put up short videos with just the music that will be featured in the episodes there. You get to see a lot of fun little slow motion videos of my neighborhood because I'm not a videographer, so I just grab what I can and use it. But so yeah, and it's, if you just look for Christian Saints podcast, if when you find it, the profile image is a painting that involves peacocks, it's sort of a peach color, then that's definitely us. That was rendered by my godfather, who is an iconographer. Most of the icons we use each week for our episodes were painted by him. We're clear when that's not the case, but he very kindly lets us use those. So look for Christian Saints podcast. In some places it's like podcast_saints or something like that. But I think if you just search for the name, it bubbles up pretty easily and you can find us there. And I would love to hear from anybody who listens to this. including people who maybe didn't agree with some of what we said. As you said, let's get to know people. Let's have real
100%.
conversations. So much of what goes on in our world gets reduced to sound bites. And as you said, then we hate the sound bite, right? I would love if something I said came off as a sound bite that you hate, write to me and I can try to maybe unpack it in a way that helps you not hate it. I'm not saying I'm going to change your mind, but maybe we can not hate each other. So very open to conversation with people. Would love to hear from folks about what they thought of today's conversation or the program that we're doing. And again, for your audience, especially the dads, what we're doing with the Lives of the Saints, a lot of good stuff about masculinity in there that I think dads would find helpful.
Absolutely. Agree. I can echo all of that. If there's anything that we talked about today, any points that I made that you're like, whoa, Young Dad Podcast, slow your roll, message me, reach out, let's talk. Let's bring you on the podcast and let's talk about it. Let's have an intelligent conversation about it. Let's talk about it. I'm not afraid to have a conversation with you. Let's do it. If I don't have the answer, but I know someone that might have the answer now, a little bit more at a higher level than me. So, Jim, you may get some referrals.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And I will say, anybody, if you either have studied a saint deeply or you've had a direct experience with a saint, through patronage for healing or something like that in your life, and you'd like to talk about it, let me know. We've done a few interviews. I'd love to do more. I find those really engaging. We're a pretty niche topic, so I realize there's only so many people that have these experiences. But if that's you, do please let me know. I'd love to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been fun.